The franchise that is Violet Evergarden has been a series that I have held in a special place in my heart ever since I first saw it. About a year has passed and nothing has changed about how I feel. When you look at it by conventional standards, it may not seem like much. It's not very action-based, there isn't an episode-by-episode plot arc, and its tone and emotional beats are a lot more quiet and subtle than the average anime. Almost. But that's exactly what makes this series so special to me, being able to stand out as my absolute favorite series of all time. It's a very well thought out character drama with a brilliant structure resembling that of an anthology series, and its animation and dialogue bring so much emotion out of characters that feel like real people, especially Violet Evergarden herself. From the beginning, she has only known violence, order, and zero remorse. But when she's thrown into a situation where there is no longer war, her desire to understand others as well as herself grows more and more. Slowly but surely, she begins to empathize with others. She begins to process her own trauma. She begins to make amends. But most importantly, she begins to love herself for who she's grown to be. And at the end of the show, she writes a letter to the seemingly late Gilbert about how she now understands the meaning of "I love you," and how grateful she is for this new life that he has given her. And now Violet's desire to understand will now be replaced by the desire for closure. Alright, now we can talk about the movie. Violet Evergarden the movie is the assumed finale of the critically acclaimed Violet Evergarden franchise, and it is indeed an amazing film. It checks all the boxes, including great characterization, well thought out structure, breathtaking music, but most importantly, beautiful and stunningly spectacular animation. Its world building is absolutely on point with its down-to-earth depiction of the city of Leyden and a village on a small island, and as always, its emotional beats, plot threads, and subtle callbacks to the previous entries brings tears to the audience's eyes. Without spoiling anything, at least not yet, it very much feels like an elongated episode of Violet Evergarden, similar to Evergarden Eternity. Its structure is not that of a conventional 3-act foundation, but at the same time, it's very careful to not feel messy. There are 2 stories being told at the same time, one about a sickly boy and the other about Violet's perception of her past. Both of these plots have something to do with finding closure. With the boy named Elise, he wants Violet to write letters on his behalf to his family when he dies, and it is partly because he wants those to be his last words to his family, instead of just suddenly passing away with nothing to say. Violet's arc of closure involves her journey through her past, and that just because she's learned the meaning of empathy and has strengthened her will to live, doesn't mean the damage is gone, and even then, it possibly still isn't. But through the events that unfold in this film, she begins to process her past, and for the first time in a long time, makes light of the situations she was put in, remembering things differently from a certain other character that I will talk about later in the spoiler section. This movie is honestly so well characterized, and it puts certain characters in positions that make complete sense for them. The amount of callbacks in this film is amazing, especially in the first 15 minutes with Anne's granddaughter. Honestly, this whole film is an emotional train wreck. But with that, it's time to get into spoiler territory because there are things I want to talk about that I can't really simplify to non-spoiler terms. Now, I feel like in order to properly dissect the film and its themes, I have to get the less important parts out of the way first before getting into the deep end. So to start off, the first 10 minutes with Anne's granddaughter Daisy, as I just said, was so good. I could not stop myself from feeling so bittersweet. Daisy obviously cares about her grandmother a lot and resents her parents for being too business-oriented to ever reach out to her. You know, a tale as old as time. And then she discovers the letters Violet had written for Anne on Clara's behalf. After the letters pique her curiosity, she goes out to explore Leyden and the island to find out Violet's history. Now, there isn't any kind of arc involving her parents, which I was kinda disappointed with, but I also knew we couldn't really have that since she was pretty much just used as a framing device. And boy, is this an amazing framing device, even showcasing how Violet herself affected the culture of the island by this thumbs up gesture Elise taught her. And the memories with Anne and Clara are so cute. As for the side characters, all of them have pretty much remained the same, and by that I mean they're still very well characterized. After time has passed, these people have either stayed with the company or gone off to do things that totally make sense for them. Of course Erica is working with Oscar to write a play now, that's completely in character for her. Claudia goes through an arc, albeit a relatively short one, concerning his somewhat paternal attachment to Violet and his concern for her, even at one point standing up for her, kind of. It's a little cheesy, but you can definitely feel the concern. Dietfried doesn't necessarily go through an arc, but whoever wrote his dialogue needs to get a raise. He does habitually scoff at Violet and the others, but after each individual misstep, he shows a bit of remorse for his actions. He still thinks literally and negatively about Violet at times, but he genuinely wants to change in order to support her, even giving a certain someone his epiphany in the end. I'll talk about that later. As for Iris, I'm not entirely sure what the point of her arc was. It is indefinitely about her wanting to be a popular scribe, which, was it in the original series too? That'd be a cool continuation. But it also gets cluttered with her resentment over the phone, but then by the end she's all technology bad, but maybe it'd be good after all. But boy is it so great to just hear her talk about herself, I missed her. It is a nice segue into the phone conversation between Ulysse and his friend though. Speaking of Ulysse, guess who we're talking about next? Now, going into this movie, I expected it to be purely about Violet without any important writing requests, and that the sickly boy was just a small little therapy conversation to segue into the more important bit I'll talk about later. I was wrong, and initially I was a bit disappointed, but gradually I was able to warm up to Ulysse, especially with his critical condition, financial situation, and desperation for closure. He initially comes off as standoffish, selfish, and cold, even towards his own family, but over time, that reclusive behavior becomes more understandable. We see how his sickness affects his relationships with his family and friends, and everyone is now pitying him even though he doesn't want that special treatment. That, and he wants to keep the letters a secret from them. And through Violet, he's able to find the right words to say to them, even having Violet deconstruct his feelings and help him figure out his emotions, which just proves how far she's come. But throughout all this, Ulysse still has a hint of frustration towards himself regarding his friend. He told his friend to not come to the hospital despite him wanting closure with him. He's not sure what to say in the letters, so he puts it off for later, which is perfectly fine for anyone, really. Anyone can take as much time as they need to find the right words, except he doesn't get the chance to. Out of left field, Violet gets a call saying that he's nearing death, and after an attempt to write, Iris can't do anything about it. It is then when they resort to using the phone to communicate with his friend Lucas, and in the spur of the moment, Ulysse says that he's sorry for pushing him away and how glad he is that they were friends. It's honestly such a heartbreaking moment, one of the best scenes of this year, and a great send-off for this character we've only seen for but a fleeting moment. But now to finally get to the heart and soul of this beautiful movie, Violet Evergarden herself. That and the big twist that was immediately given away in the trailers, but we'll just ignore that Gilbert is alive. Now, when I first found out about this, I was admittedly a little worried. Part of why I loved the original series so much was because it dealt a lot with Violet understanding herself and understanding the love Gilbert gave her, and also that she needed to process how the loss of her mentor/love interest has affected her, even inspiring her to be somewhat of a pacifist. Still, there are other messages of loss and legacy concerning literally any other person Violet has met, and it's also somewhat in the movie's favor that Violet never really had as proper closure with Gilbert as the other people she's met, so I decided to hold on to my hopes and see what this movie did with this plot point, and it kind of retroactively makes the original series even better. It makes the original show less cluttered, not that it really was in the first place, but Violet's development was tangled in a batch of a tad bit too many strings, being caught between processing the loss of a loved one and evaluating her own self-worth. But now that the former is pretty much retconned, the latter becomes her main arc in this series, and it even somewhat carries over to the movie. We first see Violet at a ceremony where a song she wrote is being recited, and immediately afterwards receives praise for her work, in which she shoots down with a remark about how she's undeserving of praise. And as I've just said a few minutes ago, because nothing I write is original, this reinforces the fact that just because Violet's okay with living and has come to a full understanding of herself, it doesn't mean she thinks so highly of herself. Despite her late mentor's efforts to make her feel loved, she still thinks lowly of herself due to the people she's hurt along her journey in the war. But then, the twist settles in. Gilbert is alive, and Claudia and Violet immediately set out to find him. Now, I was really worried that Violet would immediately rush to find Gilbert, but thankfully, in a rare time of thinking rationally, she pulls herself together and lets Claudia talk with Gilbert. And we'll soon learn why Gilbert has been gone for so long to even be presumed dead, because when the dust settled in, all he could see was everything he did wrong. Completely forgoing the times he reassured Violet, he can only remember the times he's used her as a weapon despite his good heart, and all the times she thought she was a worthless soldier due to Gilbert's lack of awareness in his actions and words. And I know I keep making real-world comparisons, but what's just as heartbreaking is that this isn't limited to fiction. No matter how good our hearts can be, sometimes we can't help but reflect on everything we've done wrong, and at times come to the conclusion that one's misfortunes is purely our fault. In Gilbert's case, it is kind of true, but he's consumed with so much guilt that he's too afraid to see Violet again. But after being inspired by Ulysses' drive for closure, Violet is having none of that. Even if she doesn't think highly of herself, she does remember all the good times she had with Gilbert. For the first time in a long time, she makes light of the past, and Violet wants to reaffirm how much Gilbert means to her, that he is the reason she strives to be a better person. So to tell him all those feelings, she writes one last letter to him before suddenly departing. One quick side note here, it was kind of out of left field that Violet and Gilbert had that one interaction, and then Violet got the call from the hospital and then immediately decided to go back to her work, which I guess that whole thing was just her being reminded yet again of Ulysses' letters. Still, it could have used a bit more cleanup. Actually, Gilbert got the epiphany after he received the letter, but Violet really should have gotten her own epiphany as well. Or maybe she did, but it was only for a brief moment. Certainly not as brief of a moment as the emotional climax, which, need I remind you, looks absolutely beautiful. It's at this point in the film that Gilbert realizes that right now, in this moment, no matter what has happened in the past, Violet feels similarly to him. Both of them feel so low of themselves, but they view the other in an immensely positive light. Regardless of anything that's happened, they see the good in each other. And now that they've both changed and are able to see their journey in a somewhat positive light, they both deserve that second chance to get to know each other again. After all, take a look at when they first appeared and where they are now. They look completely different than their past selves. From the moment Violet woke up, she has struggled to find closure in all of this emotional turmoil. And after going back to tie up a few loose ends with her job, she's going to take that second chance and choose to settle in with the one person she loves the most. It's an incredibly fitting end to this beautiful franchise. Now, if I were to say that I didn't feel even an inkling of disappointment, that would be a lie. It's not like I wanted this to be better than Evergarden Eternity, in which, yeah, the spin-off movie is better than this, but I really didn't expect Ulysses' story to take up a lot of time, since that left less time for Violet's character arc, and we never really got more important moments that we needed to, and also that some may feel that the ending has a tiny bit of contradiction to the flow of the series. Heck, even I was waiting for some kind of twist at the end. But anything that I was initially worried about grew on me in an instant. Everything about this film is beautiful and spectacular, from how well written it is, to its characterization, to the beautiful visuals and animation, to the dialogue, and to its amazing soundtrack. I know I called Owl House Best of the Year material in my ranking video, but this movie is, without question, my new favorite thing of the entire year, and this film will always be one of my personal favorites, alongside Evergarden Eternity. Violet Evergarden the movie gets a 9 out of 10. It is truly a masterpiece of a send-off to my favorite franchise.